The second reason why the people thought it was necessary to implement apartheid, which, by the way, if I say apartheid, it is actually just a word for segregation, an Afrikaans word for segregation.
Apartheid segregation was not about crime. It was not even about each ethnicity or people having their own homeland. It was about creating a system where whites could dominate and had different or favorable rules for them to allow them to rule the rest. Why keep defending it and acting like that's not what it was? Willem Petzer says apartheid is just a word for segregation. Now it's used about Israeli discrimination and called Israeli apartheid. These are the things that get to Afrikaners, perhaps to Willem in particular. Unfortunately, Willem and the apartheid revisionists choose the exact wrong strategy. They then defend apartheid and sort of try to position apartheid as something that wasn't that bad. And he says that don't call what the Jews are doing right now apartheid. This makes the apartheid revisionist look crazy. Trying to reframe apartheid only achieves calling evil good and good evil. Why does the apartheid revisionist think they have to defend apartheid? You can admit it was wrong and still be proud to be an Afrikaner. Apartheid was a bad and evil idea. All groups have had and practiced bad and evil ideas. People respect those who admit it and change, not those who double down on evil. That's nonsensical. That's evil.
The main argument was actually that if they do not pass this Land Act, because remember, the Land Act didn't prohibit black people from buying land in white areas only. It also prevented other people or white people or Indian people, colored people, etc., from buying land in black areas. Now, the reason why Jan Smuts actually argued for this law that he later promulgated was, in the first place, because he said he didn't want the complete takeover of the black areas or the Bantustans by white individuals who had all the money at that time. Because he said that white individuals had the funds to basically buy up all of this land. And then there would be absolutely nothing left for black people. And black people, especially the tribal chiefs, were more than willing to let their land go for a very low price. And he didn't want that to happen. This was the main argument. And this is not my opinion. This is what Jan Smuts actually wrote when he passed this law.
Willem wants us to believe that homelands protected people. He does not mention that people were clean pushed off their land, including kings and chiefs, and their lands actually shrunk. It's not like they got more land out of the homelands, their lands were actually shrunk. And he says they were given land. How can you be given land that's already yours? Why act like apartheid was trying to protect black groups, instead of its true intent to keep them passive and happy enough in the Bantustans far away from white areas, while using the army and the police with the help of government-appointed Bantustan leaders to subdue and control the mass of black people, to ensure there was no revolt.
That say this sort of stuff, because usually when you have people that are so obsessed with apartheid today, it's usually young black people who never lived during apartheid.
Willem Petzer says older people, black, colored, and Indian, are not obsessed with apartheid, that only they unspeak about it, while they were never even affected by it. This is mean-spirited and not true. However, if we were to grant it for the sake of the conversation, you will find that the older black people may not speak about apartheid and what went on then because of the memories and the pain it brings up, not because they have moved past it somehow. That is like saying the Boers should move past and forget about the British concentration camps their forefathers were thrown in. The Boers have not forgotten the war and the camps and their lands being burnt, and that was over 100 years ago. Where young blacks and young whites go wrong on apartheid is this. Young whites downplay it a lot, and see a man like Herman Mashaba bring up apartheid and think he should just get over it and move on. They suffer from a presentism where all that matters is the present. This is also why many of them turn to apartheid revisionism. It's ignorant and shallow thinking. The black young people make a mistake by trying to fight the battles of yesterday that have already been won by some youngster with a dustbin lid and some stones. The young blacks need to focus on building, not empty socialist rhetoric, also ignorant and shallow thinking. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
And before he became Prime Minister, Mr. Verwoerd, or actually Dr. Verwoerd, was the Minister of Native Affairs in South Africa. And he held this job for most of his political career before becoming Prime Minister of South Africa. And Mr. Verwoerd was actually criticized during that time by his peers almost as much as he's criticized today, but for the complete opposite reason. Mr. Albert Hertzog, the son of, or actually he was also Dr. Albert Hertzog, the son of General Barry Hertzog, was a huge opponent of Mr. Verwoerd. And his main argument against Dr. Verwoerd, sorry, I'm saying Mr. the whole time, Dr. Verwoerd, was that he said that Verwoerd was taking white people's money and giving it to black people for no reason whatsoever. And he argued that white taxpayers' money should be spent only on the development of white taxpayer-funded schools, hospitals, for example. Obviously, Dr. Verwoerd.
The tax debate with Verwoerd, as if Verwoerd was a kind man trying to lift blacks up. Bantu education was a systemized tool of propaganda, control, and labor development. He was using the white people's money to keep the peace and educate the black people just enough to keep them as a permanent labor class. Hertzog was actually the short-sighted one here. As far as the apartheid doctrine of Verwoerd was concerned, what Verwoerd saw was the future. Hertzog just saw their tax money going to the blacks. Bantu education was an apartheid weapon to limit blacks, not to help them. The ANC caused the education system to fail on purpose. What the ANC does differently is that they collapse the education system. It's being done on purpose because they're also using it as a weapon. They closed TVET colleges so that people did not have the skills to do for themselves and build, so that they could be grant beneficiaries. The same reason they cannot read and are taught maths lit and not just maths on a standard grade or a higher grade. The ANC creating permanent grant beneficiaries. Defending apartheid is the same as defending the corrupt and failed apartheid regime, because the apartheid regime was entirely corrupt as well. The whole system was corrupt. That's what apartheid actually was. It wasn't pockets of corruption. It was that their whole system was built on it. It was fundamentally flawed as an idea, as a way of working, and as a system. They just made sure to keep one segment of society fed enough and happy enough to maintain the unmaintainable system, so that they could tell themselves the lie that they didn't know about it because the government hid it from them. They weren't hiding anything. Apartheid was the most in-your-face, blatant system on earth. It was efficient, it was brutal, and it was straightforward. The white people who say, well, they grew up under apartheid, but they didn't know about it, are just as bad a liar as someone who looks at apartheid now and tries to reframe it as something good. Because all you would have to do is switch it around. What if the black people were in the position of the whites and the whites were in the position of the blacks? Is it a good thing now? If the fascist apartheid regime wanted to educate blacks and help them, they could have just done that. There was no need for a two-tiered, future labor determining schooling system to keep some people as the permanent underclass. That's such a nationalist socialist thing to do, because that's what apartheid was.
To the north of the Cape Colony, when you pass that mountain range there is absolutely nothing. You can even zoom in here and you'll see from the air it's miles and miles and miles of absolutely nothing. There's nothing here. Nobody can survive here. Nobody can survive on 60% of this country without having a boreal technology, without the wind pump that was brought here by the Europeans.
The claim that Bantu-speaking people in southern Africa could not dig wells before the arrival of white settlers is historically and archaeologically false. While the style of wells differed from the industrial brick-lined and the wind-operated wells brought by Europeans, indigenous southern Africans had sophisticated methods of accessing groundwater and managing water resources for centuries. They had the technical ability, and we see this evidence even in mining. The argument that Bantu tribes could not dig deep into the earth is contradicted by the extensive pre-colonial mining industry. And some of those mines that the Brits took from the Boers actually belonged to the blacks first. But we'll leave that for now. Iron Age Bantu-speaking communities in South Africa, such as the ancestors of the Sotho and the Tswana and the Venda, were expert miners of copper, tin, and iron. Archaeological sites in the Limpopo province show pre-colonial mines where workers dug shafts and narrow trenches over 20 meters deep. They used iron gads, chisels, and hoes to break through rock. Technically, if the society has the engineering skills to sink a 20-meter shaft for copper or gold, they possess the exact same skills required to sink a shaft for water. More specifically, there is a clear evidence of different types of wells used across southern Africa. The shallow wells, also known as a dambo. In the wetter eastern regions of South Africa, Bantu farmers practice wetland farming in areas known as dambos, or what the Afrikaners would call a vlei. They dug shallow wells to irrigate vegetable gardens, a practice that predates European contact and continued well into the 20th century. Deep sand wells, also known as an unjambo. In more arid regions, such as the Kalahari, even up to central Namibia, Bantu-speaking pastoralists were renowned as well diggers that were often 3 to 5 meters deep and could reach up to 20 meters where required to reach the water table in dry riverbeds. Though located further north in Kenya and Ethiopia, the Barora, a pastoralist group, have used tula wells, land-excavated shafts with subterranean walkways, for over 600 years. This demonstrates that well digging technology was a widespread feature of sub-Saharan pastoralist cultures long before colonial intervention. Bantu-speaking communities did not just dig for water, they redirected it, of course, because they were farmers. They had irrigation furrows in what is called the Soutpansberg of Limpopo and the eastern escarpment of Mpumalanga. There are remnants of pre-colonial stone wall terraces and irrigation furrows all over the place. In parts of South Africa, ancient aqueducts and canals, many meters long, some even kilometers long, were built to move water from mountain streams to agricultural fields. And the apartheid revisionist is falling into this old misconception, that's been pushed for centuries at this point. The myth that the Bantu people did not dig wells often stems from a narrow definition of a well, permanent versus seasonal. In many parts of South Africa, Bantu settlements were strategically located near permanent rivers or springs, making deep wells unnecessary. When they did dig, it was often sand wells in dry riverbeds that could naturally collapse during the rainy season, leaving little archaeological footprint compared to the stone-lined European well. During the 19th and 20th centuries, colonial historians often downplayed indigenous technology to justify the civilizing mission, or the terra nullius, which is the empty land myth. By claiming indigenous people didn't know how to access groundwater, it made the land appear unproductive until white settlers arrived. The archaeological record of deep shaft mining and the historical record of sand wells and irrigation canals and other types of wells prove that Bantu-speaking tribes both could and did manage groundwater effectively long before 1652. The claim that Bantu-speaking people didn't dig wells or were given the best land are common tropes that originated during the colonial and apartheid eras to justify land dispossession, to justify taking the land of black tribes. These myths, many believe, stem from a 19th century doctrine called the empty land myth, first published by W.A. Holden in the 1860s. Now, it's often attributed to him, but that's a little unfair. It's not completely attributable to him. It may have existed in many forms from many different people before and during his time as well. Sounds something like this. Bantu tribes and white settlers arrived in South Africa at the same time. The 1652 versus 1652 myth. Then they often follow up with something like the interior of the country was empty when the Boers moved inland, ignoring the displacement caused by the Mfakani. They then would say something like indigenous people lacked the civilized technology like wells or windpumps to claim ownership of the land, and thus justifying taking the land. Archaeology has proven all these 3 points false. Bantu-speaking farmers were established in the Limpopo region by 500 AD and in the KwaZulu-Natal region by 300 AD, well over 1,000 years before the first Dutch ship arrived in the Cape. Please note that when you hear the claim that there is no record of something, it often refers to a lack of written records by the indigenous people themselves. However, the archaeological record, the physical stuff left in the ground, tells a very different and much more advanced story of African engineering and the truth about the land. Thank you for listening. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running?